Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
Hello. Looks like the lighting is a little bit funky. Sorry, guys. Let's try something else. I'm not really sure why the lighting is so funky, but kind of looks like we have halos going on here. We are so excited to be back for another episode. We are talking about positivity tonight, and we are just getting set up here, so thanks so much for joining us. The first thing we're going to be talking about is kind of introducing it, and then we're going to get into like the why and all of that, right?
Yes. Still know if you need your computer.
Yes, I may go grab my computer, but why don't you introduce it for us, and I'll be right back.
Yeah, your camera looks foggy. I don't know what's going on.
Just go ahead and I'll work on it.
So, sorry for the technical difficulties, everybody. But we wanted to talk a little bit about positivity today. That's better. And being practical with your positivity, because the positivity movement, if you will, has gained a lot of steam the last few years. But I think there's a flip side of that. When you see the reality of life and bad things that can happen, how do you view whatever situation you're going through that could be potentially bad in a positive light still? And I know, at least for me, that's been somewhat of a challenge to have that kind of dichotomy there, that approach of how can I look at a situation that I'm going through in a positive manner when objectively it's a challenging or even bad or sad situation. And so that's kind of the groundwork for what we want to talk about is how you can do that, but also just how to improve your outlook in life in general to be more of a positive frame of mind.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, like Matt said, the positivity movement has so many great things about it and things that we obviously love and want to bring more of into our life. But I think we wanted to bring like sort of a grounding sense to that, conversation of positivity, in our everyday lives.
Yeah, and I think, just to kind of just an observation is that being positive, I think, sometimes can come across as being the same as just being very outgoing and outwardly happy looking. And I don't think that necessarily is a correct synonym or correct perception. Sometimes people who are more soft-spoken or reserved, or maybe aren't outwardly very exuberant or emotional, those people can still have a positive attitude. So being positive isn't necessarily just about how you appear on the outside. It's a mindset. It's how you live your life, how you view your worldview. So it's not necessarily just about how you appear on the outside, because I think that can be kind of a misconception in people who maybe are a little bit more reserved or aren't exuberant and very emotive. They can be framed incorrectly, and they can be judged incorrectly for being pessimistic or down or an Eeyore, and that's not necessarily a correct perception.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think bringing some like clarity to this subject, and hopefully giving you guys some tips about how to move forward and bring more positivity that is, keeping it real will be helpful for you guys. So let's jump into why. Why does being positive even matter? Why is it even a conversation? And, for me, this looks like life can be whatever I view it as. It can look however I view it. And so I have a choice. I can look at life as, all the bad things and just focus on those, or I can look at the good things and focus on those. Or I can be honest with myself and try to have as positive of a perspective as I can in taking both. And that's, I feel like what I do is I try to evaluate everything that's in front of me and take as positive of an approach as possible, because like I said, we do have a choice.
Yeah, and two events can happen to the same person or two similar events, and you can have completely different mindsets about that and a completely different outcome in the end because of that person's mindset. And I think, we know that our life is really, how it begins by our thoughts and our belief systems.
Exactly.
And that is going to produce a certain outcome. And, like you said, you have a choice on whether you're going to see it through a certain lens. And,
Right.
For me, it's an important discussion because I tend to have a little bit of a more negative or mindset sometimes. And that can be something that you have to overcome. And I guess it's important to note that you can overcome it.
Yes.
Just because you may tend to have a certain mindset. Maybe your set point, if you will, if you think about it as a gauge, your set point may be you may be trending towards pessimism. You can change that set point and you can overcome that and start to see things through a different lens and through a different perspective. And I think we're going to talk about this a little bit is people like to say, "Oh, I'm just a realist."
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of the defense for somebody saying something negative.
Yeah.
And so we're going to talk about that some, but you really have to start questioning whether you're really viewing something as reality or you're just giving how you're looking at it is the problem.
Right. It can be kind of a cop out, like, oh, well, I'm just trying to be real here. Are you trying to be real and evaluate what is truth, or are you trying to put a negative spin on something so that you don't get your hopes up or whatever, And I think that's an important distinction to make.
Yeah, I think you touched on something. It can be a defense mechanism,
right?
To where you don't want to get your hopes up. You want to kind of you don't want to seem too excited about something or get too high because you're afraid of the potential low. And what sometimes if we have that mindset, we forget that it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
And it's really, what if the situation could have turned out fine, but because of how we started acting towards the situation, then we kind of made the bad thing we were afraid of happen. There's a thought process that, you sort of can create your own reality, and when you start putting these ideas out, you attract them. I mean, it's the law of attraction. You're attracting these bad things, these negative things, and then it just compounds and compounds because you feared something bad happening and it does happen, and so you think you were right in your mind, and it just keeps going.
I think we see that in people who are saying, well, see, bad things always happen to me, and then more bad things happen to them. They're constantly focusing on the negatives, focusing on the bad things. And so by doing that, like you said, the law of attraction means that you're bringing more bad and negative things into your life because that's what you're focusing on.
Yeah.
So let's dive into how can I be positive? What kind of things can I do to bring more positivity into my life, to make that a part of who I am and how I go about my day to day? What would you say for that?
I mean, I think it starts with it begins, of course, with your thought process. You have to change. Your thoughts become your beliefs, and your beliefs turn into actions and outcomes, I think.
Yes.
So it has to start, and you have to start in the origin. What seeds are you planting in your mind? How are you feeding those things? We've talked about before, what you're putting in your mind, it's garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
And, sometimes for so many years, we've been feeding ourselves this garbage that we don't realize it's garbage anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
And so it's the steady state we're in now. And so we don't even realize that we've been poisoning ourselves with these thought patterns, these belief systems. And, I think a lot of it, when you talk about positivity and negativity, a lot of it is, we have to talk about fear. And why the certain people we're listening to, or certain ideas we've listened to or read, people are trying, if you ever are starting to feel a tinge of fear, you have to look at why am I afraid, and what is that person's intention on making me afraid? Right.
It reminds me this morning in the sermon, the preacher where we attend, he was talking about when you are basically accepting something, or you are hearing something from somebody that is fear-filled, that's a way to be controlled, is through that fear. If I can make you afraid, I can start to control you. And we always talk about in the series, like, we want to start taking back the pen of our lives. We want to start taking back responsibility of who we are and our outcomes. And so that really does begin with, okay, I'm going to start controlling what I think about and what I focus on. And I think that goes beautifully with what you said, Matt, is just like, we've got to start with our mindset. We've got to start with, what are we thinking about? What are we planning in our minds? And I also think that begins with how you speak to yourself. Like, if you're not speaking to yourself kindly and in a positive way, if you're just yelling at yourself internally all the time, or you're mad at yourself, or you're speaking to yourself in an angry way a lot, then that's going to also mean that it's going to be harder for you to be positive in those situations too. And so I think just reevaluating, okay, how am I going about talking to myself? How am I going about talking to, therefore, others? And how can I use that as a tool to I hate to use the word rewire, but you know what I mean, reset, rewire our mindset when it comes to being positive.
Yeah.
And, if you're constantly saying negative things to yourself, how can you be positive? How can you have a positive outlook on life?
Yeah, and I think, we're taught, most of us who grew up in good homes, we were taught to be kind to other people. And sometimes we aren't taught to be kind to ourselves, because I think it's just thought that that's second nature. You're going to love yourself. You're going to be kind to yourself. But I think a lot of us, again, no fault to our parents or our upbringing, but just we become for whatever reasons, we start talking negatively to ourselves. We start that self-loathing cycle for whatever it could be, our looks, our intellect, our athleticism, whatever it is. We start this pattern and we don't talk about it. We hide it. And it just, like we've talked about, then 10 years down the road, you don't even realize that you are talking negative to yourself. It's just become part of your habits.
Yeah, exactly. I think, it just becomes second nature to what you're doing. You don't even think about it anymore. And bringing some awareness back, I think awareness is key too. Okay, am I aware of how I'm actually talking to myself? Am I really thinking about what am I thinking about? Where are my thoughts? And this can be, just starting with as something as simple as just starting to think about your thoughts, or even writing out your thoughts. I was even thinking of just being practicing compassion with yourself when you start down that road of self-loathing or being upset at yourself. Start, recognizing that and saying, okay, how could I look at this in a way that I have compassion on myself instead of I'm angry with myself? How could I have sympathy or, for myself in this situation? How can I have a different perspective?
Yeah, I mean, and do you have any ideas of how somebody can break that pattern? Because it's, once if you become aware of it, then what do you do next?
Well, for me, if I become aware that I'm speaking negatively to myself, then I try to stop myself right at that moment and go, okay, because it's usually an isolated incident. So let's say that I broke something. Like the other day, I broke off this piece of our fan, our box fan. And I was really upset with myself, and I was having a lot of negative thoughts, how could you, and all this stuff. But then I stop myself and I go, okay, but wait a minute, it's a fan. It's not that expensive. I could buy another one. It still works, and I kind of went down this path of well, I could look at this a different way. And what if I was a friend talking to me? What would I say? Well, I would say, hey, look, it's a fan. It's not really that important in the grand scheme of life. It's not worth getting upset with yourself about. And then it's how can you laugh about this? How can you view this in a different way? How would you talk to yourself? Would it be a friend? I guess is what I would do next. Do you have anything to add to that?
I guess.
Apparently he does.
I guess once I mean, that's a good idea for if it happens once. I think a lot of us still have these patterns that we have consistently, issues where we run up against, and then we may recognize, okay, I'm saying this to myself again, or I'm upset with myself again. And I think we need to figure out a way to break a pattern and replace it with something else.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, like something I've said before, I think we've talked about is like just saying the word cancel. Like when I say that thing, I say cancel. And I say something that I know to be true. Like if a reoccurring thought that you have, like first of all, it's great to just journal out reoccurring thoughts and then have like speak truth and life over that. So in my case, like, I may have a thought about, a negative thought about myself, but then say, okay, but what does God say about me? And the other side, you could do the left-hand side is your thoughts, and then the right-hand side is what God says about you. And then when I do have that negative thought, I can go cancel, and then I can go, this is what God says about me, and then you say that thing, So I think practicing that, having something on hand that you could actually say to counteract that, I think is helpful too. And that's believable. I mean, right? It's not just like, oh, I'm the most amazing whatever in the world. Like, okay, well, you may not be, but you could say, God made me in his image and I am beautifully and wonderfully made or whatever,
Sure. I guess what I'm trying to get at a little bit is more things that maybe actually you need to make a correction. Like, yes, you shouldn't have this negative thought pattern, but there is something that you need to actually change. So what can you do? I guess I'd say if you're having those things, but in the past you just continue to let them go and you've continued to let that negative pattern happen, like realizing it and then figuring out at least some small action you can do to counteract that. Like, what can I had a bad meeting today at work, and man, I must suck at holding meetings. My client's mad at me. I must be terrible at being a project manager. All right, no, that's not helping me. One is saying, is this thought helping me? Is this useful?
Right.
I think because then your mind, okay, this isn't actually helping me. I'm not getting the result I need from saying this, from thinking this.
Right.
I think one is taking accountability then for an action that what can I do? Because a lot of times we like to think, oh, it's someone else's fault and put it on them. And we think at first, at least I've thought that, okay, now it's their fault. Now I'm waiting on them to fix the situation. But in reality, then I'm letting myself be the victim because I'm giving them control of the situation. Where if I took accountability for it, then now I'm in control of whatever it is. Even if it's not necessarily my fault, I can be accountable for the solution. And now I'm in the driver's seat. And so instead of, wow, that meeting didn't go well, I suck at holding meetings, I'm a terrible project manager. Well, okay, what actually went wrong? Oh, my client was upset. Well, what were they upset about? Well, they didn't like meeting minutes that I kept from last meeting. Okay, I'm going to take better meeting minutes this week.
Right.
And then you start building up that trust in yourself by breaking that pattern, and you just continue to grow that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what we're getting at is like dissecting that situation.
Yeah, dissecting it instead of just letting yourself go into negativity, dissecting really what's the root of it, and then coming up with a small action that you can then latch onto that's counteracting the negative thought pattern.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I like that a lot. So, the next thing we were going to talk about is how do we now take this positivity and apply it to a negative situation? Because there are going to be negative things that happen in our lives, things that aren't what we would want. People, maybe somebody gets sick, or we get in a car accident, or we get hacked. I don't know. There could be a lot of different things that are negative. We get fired. There could be a lot of different things that could be negative. What we would say, not something that we wouldn't want in our lives, I guess I should say. We apply those labels to those things. But what is something that we don't necessarily want more of in our lives? And that is really not adding a lot of great, wonderful things, maybe the way that we want it to. How can we change our mindset when it comes to those situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think first you have to acknowledge that like the bad things happen, and sometimes it's just a really bad situation, and it's sad. It's unforeseen. You wouldn't want that to happen, and you don't want to put on rose-colored glasses and act like everything's great. It's going to be okay. Everything's perfect. Some of these things are going to be life-changing events. Now, some of them are going to be a lot less. It's just something bad happened. So I think some of these principles can apply broadly. But I think one of the things is, really looking at what story are you telling yourself about what happened.
Right.
Is it really the accurate story? Because, again, going back to what our preacher said this morning, he said something to the effect of, the story we tell ourselves is more important than the event itself.
Right.
Because it's really our perception of the event a lot of times.
Exactly.
Not everything is just an objective fact. A lot of times it's perception that we have based on our life experience, our belief systems, whatever it is.
Right.
And so you really have to look at what story am I telling myself about this event,
right.
and is it accurate?
Absolutely. I totally agree. And that from that, okay, we may attribute, okay, this is a negative situation. I got fired, for example. This is a negative situation. Well, is it really negative? Because maybe you're going to go out there and you're going to interview for another job, and it's actually going to be a way better situation, and it's not going to be as much stress. Maybe it'll be more money. Maybe it'll be more flexibility, whatever it is. So it may not actually be that. Or it may be, like one time, for example, I lost 5 students at once for my studio. And I went from like 12 students down to 7 in a matter of like a week or something. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've worked so hard to get to where I am. This is really tough. And I don't understand why this is happening. And then a matter of like, I want to say 2 weeks later, I got a text or a call or something from my mentor, who I taught as a part of his program as well. And he said, my wife is in the hospital. She has had some sort of episode, and she's on life support at this point. And it was extremely sudden. Like 1 minute he was getting her a glass of water, the next minute she was toppled over. So, in that moment, I started to understand, like, actually me not having those students right then actually helped me to take on those other students while he was helping to be with his wife in her final days and hours. So you just never know. Again, like, we may not see the whole picture, but like sometimes we see that as, oh, that's terrible, that's negative. But actually it's sort of like, sometimes that can be a pruning in a way,
Yeah.
Depending on the situation. I'm not saying that's every situation.
Yeah, and I mean, in the moment you may not necessarily see it, but again, when the negative moment happens, but you have to try to see it in a different light, and you can, like we've talked about before, you can make up the story, right? Like, it doesn't have to be. You can make reality, in some ways, this has been taken out of context, but reality is malleable. Mm-hmm. Like, you can make it a story that, again, how is this going to be useful for me in the future? Even if you feel in that moment, this is terrible, I lost my job, it's awful, how can I put food on the table? Make something up that's going to be useful for you. Oh, this happened so I can do X, Y, Z, or this happened so I can pursue X, Y, Z.
Right. It's more than even just making, it's like, now I have opportunities to pursue something I really love, or whatever. It doesn't have to be,
Sure.
Doesn't have to sound as, like, as crazy, whatever. But I think it can be like, yeah, it opened up doors for me that I wouldn't have otherwise. There's also ones that obviously are much more severe, and ones like, maybe like a friend of mine recently lost her son, and he was, just starting his life really. He was, in college and just wrapping up, I think, college. And so that situation, obviously, like, it's hard to see the positive in that situation. It's hard to have a positive story, but I'm just amazed by the courage and the just grit of this friend of mine, because she's been trying to see all the good stories in this situation. She's been documenting or, sharing on social media, like, some of the ways that her son, like, affected some other people in positive ways. People have written letters and other things, and ways he encouraged them, or he was an artist and how his art was encouraging, or whatever else. So I think there's, even in those really severe and horrible situations that, of course, we would never want to bring into our lives, there can still be a good story, still be positivity that can come from that, even when it's a really dark situation. And I think there still can be something that you can, try to find some way to still see the good in everything as much as you can. We're not saying that things are perfect or anything like that, obviously, but I think that this kind of leads into a discussion of, we talked about like a deeper purpose.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think no, that's a good
Yeah.
that's a good point. I mean, people that you lose, especially in cases where you lose somebody, it can be a wake up call to you.
Sure.
To be more grateful for the life that you have, to be more cognizant that life is short, it's precious, it's a vapor, and that each day we wake up is important and shouldn't be wasted.
Yeah.
There's a quote, memento mori, and I think the story is that the Roman emperors, when they would have a huge victory, they would go down the streets of their city and they would have a servant whisper this in their ear: remember, you die, remember, you're going to die. And even when it's just a reminder that we're all mortal, we're all human, and every day we should be grateful for what we have, and it could be our last day potentially.
Right.
And I think when we do have those events, it reminds us that to be grateful for them and the life that they had, and also that we can, if we were close to them, that we can carry on something from them, that they can live through us. The positive things that they did can live through our example, that what they gave us isn't going to be forgotten.
Absolutely. I think, just like you said, it's an opportunity to be grateful in a different way, I think, too, because when we find gratitude in something that's really difficult, it takes courage. It takes, really looking at that. It's easy to just be upset and hurt and frustrated. It's harder to like actually find the good in that and actually find something to be grateful for and to attach to that. And I totally agree that, with our life being fleeting, and this just reminds me of our title of this video series, No More Some Days. And that's the point, we want to start living our lives to the fullest now. And I think there's
No, I was just gonna say, it's a scary thing that you don't want to think about, mortality, but it's also an empowering thing for several reasons. One,
for sure.
It just brings you to the present, that today is what I have, so I better make the most of it. And these trivial things that happen that we get so upset about, we need to learn to leave those aside and move on and overcome those. Two, it's liberating because we get so caught up in oh, well, I don't want to do that because it's going to be embarrassing, or people are going to make fun of me. It's like, nobody's going to remember you in like literally 50 years, maybe your grandkids. But once your great grandkids, like nobody's, unless you invent electricity, like no one literally is going to remember you. And so go do what you want to do, pursue what you're going to pursue, because it doesn't, like, nobody's going to care.
Yeah. And it just goes back to like the only opinion that matters is God's here, and pursue what you want to pursue and not let the opinions of others hold you back. And I just was going to talk more about that deeper purpose. I think sometimes that leads you to finding a deeper purpose. A little about some of my family's history is my dad lost one of his younger brothers when he was younger. My dad was probably like 12 or something like that, and his younger brother died in a fire, and most people see that obviously as like a horrible situation that you couldn't get something good from, but in his case, his parents used some of the insurance money for him to be able to go to a photography camp at the library, and that got him interested in photography. And then he later pursued it in high school again so he could go to games for free. And then later he decided that he was going to pursue a career in that, and that's what he's done. And that led him to meeting my mom and doing a bunch of other stuff. And thus here I am. But I think sometimes we see, like, we're very maybe short-sighted. We're only looking at what's in front of us, and we're not seeing the long-term vision there of, maybe this could be leading to something that is good, even though this was a bad or negative situation.
Well, and then it's up to you to make it good, right?
Well, sure.
That goes back to being accountable. Now you're at whatever situation you're in, you're gonna choose to either flip it to positive or negative. Like, that same situation could have turned out a totally different story if different choices were made. Absolutely. So you're the writer of your story. You're the writer of this book, and it's up to you to make this situation positive, so that then 10 years, 15 down the road, you're going to be part of someone else's story that says, because of this person and what they did, I'm where I am now.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that's so true. And that just brings us to, one of Matt and I's favorite quotes, that life happens for you, not to you. And you have an opportunity there to take responsibility and take the reins and say, I'm going to really make a different outcome here. I'm going to take this opportunity to actually have something good, bring something good about in my life. And I think that's where, like, we all love the comeback story. We all love that story of, like, when the person gets injured and then they come back and they're stronger than ever, because it wasn't by accident. It was because they chose to go and do the thing, even though they experienced that injury or whatever it was.
Yeah, and I think it's just important that it doesn't, like, it's really a choice whether you believe that or not. And that's going to really decide on whether or not that quote is true.
Absolutely.
Because, things can look dire at certain situations, things can look bad. But if you keep telling yourself that, and it's hard to believe sometimes, but if you can continue to believe that, then it becomes, like we talked about, a negative self-fulfilling prophecy. It becomes a positive self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
no, I totally agree. I mean, if we're continuing to focus on the positive and continuing to focus on what's good in our lives, it can't help but bring more of it into our lives, just by the law of attraction.
And I think, a way to make that, because it can be hard, especially, it can be hard for me to believe that sometimes. And so a way, what we focus on, like, persists and grows. So at times when that's hard to believe, I think a nice trick, a nice tactic to help that is have, like, 3 or 4 different things in your back pocket, in your memory, that regardless of how bad things are, if you think about this, it's going to change your focus, and it's going to either give you a sense of gratitude, you're going to laugh, you're going to be happy, you're going to have a deep sense of love or purpose. I mean, one easy thing for me is when, something isn't going very well, is I think of our dog Zan curled up in his bed, and he's looking super cute, and it that memory triggers a lot of positivity for me, and so that can put you, like that, back in a place of gratitude or happiness or joy. And so that gets you back on that path of changing your focus very quickly, because if you keep going on that path of a negative thought process, it's just going to keep getting worse. So you need to be able to break that, like we talked about earlier, very quickly, so then you can start feeling in a positive manner and building up that habit.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you can't deny that feeling of gratitude or what positivity or whatever, of the examples that you gave when you have a strong memory like that. I was also thinking of, like, times when it seemed like the world was ending, but yet you lived through it, and God brought you through it. I was thinking about that. Like, I saw a quote today that said, like, you've already survived all your worst days. Like, it's not to say that you won't in the future, but it's saying, like, you survived all your worst days so far, like you didn't, like, you're still here. There's a reason you're still here, so, thinking about, okay, how can I make it, put this positive outlook on it and tell myself a new story that's going to fit, my life, my goals, etc., and help me to take responsibility and move forward in the best possible light.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all I had, or all we had. And we guys just really appreciate you guys supporting. And don't forget to share and subscribe on YouTube.
And if you have any tricks or tips that you use to change your mindset quickly, let us know in the comments to share those. We'd love to hear them. And, I think we wish everybody a happy Christmas week.
Yes.
Safe travels if you're traveling. And, we'll be back hopefully next week.
All right. Take care, guys.
Bye.